Welcome back to the show. We turn now to the life and times of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. She played a major role in the fight against apartheid in South Africa, particularly during those years when her husband, Nelson Mandela, was locked up in prison. Often referred to as the mother of the nation, she passed away earlier this month. Joining me now is Ebrahim Rasool. He is a former South African ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Anand.
Ambassador, you knew Winnie Mandela personally, and of course she was a very high-profile ANC member who was one of the leaders in the fight against apartheid. What are your thoughts on her passing?
I think it is a really sad day for South Africa that we take leave of someone like Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. I think we have departed with people who had been on Robben Island, like Ahmed Kathrada and others. We had seen the demise of Nelson Mandela himself. But this is something different. This is not a person who had stature by virtue of a position that was held, nor of a long, almost 3-decade imprisonment. This is the person with a completely different persona. She had worked her way by her own steam into the hearts of South Africans, if not the hearts of people across the world, because she symbolized that struggle that we had. She was the very human face. If Mandela was the saintly face, then Winnie Madikizela-Mandela was the very human face of what apartheid had done to us and what it could evoke in us. Nelson Mandela, for example, had to rise above his anger and his passions in order to forge a United Nations. Winnie Mandela reflected the very contradictions of being a victim of the apartheid system and refusing to make it victimizer.
This is what the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say shortly after her death was announced. Let's watch.
She was not only an inspiration, but she also touched the lives of many, millions of South Africans during the dark days of apartheid, when the ANC was banned, when our people were living under the jackboot of apartheid. She remained the sole voice of the democratic movement.
Ambassador, listening to what President Ramaphosa had to say there, and during the long period of Nelson Mandela's incarceration, she effectively became the voice of the resistance, didn't she?
No, absolutely. She became that voice because she was fearless. She did not mind the consequences, particularly after she had seen a generation of ANC and liberation leaders going to Robben Island, and that same generation also going into exile, the banning of the liberation movements, and so forth. She took it upon herself to say that I will articulate the pain and humiliation of apartheid, and that she did so effectively. And in a sense, the apartheid government could not tolerate someone speaking the truth and articulating the pain of South Africans, and they martyred her by banning her to Brandfort for 7 years, by putting her under solitary confinement for 491 days, by torturing her, by imprisoning her, and doing all kinds of things to her. And so I think that the might of an apartheid machine weighing down on a single individual woman, I think made her the kind of focal point across the world for what the struggle was about. And that's a major reason why we were able to win the moral imagination of the world in the struggle against apartheid.
As you point out, she endured a lot of personal pain and suffering. There was a columnist writing a tribute to her this week, and the columnist said, and I'm quoting here, she survived during the many years of apartheid, surveillance, threats, harassment, arrest, and imprisonment. As you point out, 491 days in solitary confinement and 7 years in banishment. What kind of toll did that take on her?
I think, you know, when you are incarcerated in prison, as many South Africans were, there is a structure to your incarceration. There is a regiment to it. You wake up at a particular time, you go back to sleep at a particular time, you get your meals at a particular time, and in between you have all of these people around you who are in a similar situation strengthening you. The unique thing about Winnie Madikizela-Mandela was the fact that there was no structure to the suffering that she bore. She could see a world out there that, that she was missing out on when she was banished and imprisoned. Secondly, she could see the pain of people every day when they were punished by the apartheid system, either through poverty or through repression. And she had the challenge of whether to remain silent in the face of that or not. And I think that that made her the human hero of South Africa, other than the saintly hero, the one who often faltered in her approach to how she would confront this evil machine. She needed to face the police and often was lured into anger against them because of what she was able to see around her. And so I think that she was the one hero that South Africa has that was absolutely human and that could epitomize what ordinary South Africans in their millions felt every day under the yoke of apartheid.
She was called the mother of the nation, but she was also very controversial. How are South Africans responding to her death now?
I think South Africans, by and large, are responding with grace and with dignity to Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. I think South Africans understand that if in 1994 we could forgive the apartheid government, then whatever missteps Winnie Madikizela-Mandela may have made in her life, we should be as gracious in forgiving her those kind of missteps, because her intention was not one of evil. Her intention was good, even if she faltered. And so I think that there is an atmosphere amongst black South Africans of forgiveness and of understanding, whereas I think those who she confronted so vigorously during the apartheid times, whose consciences she was constantly questioning, they are the ones who today may be very apt to bring out all of these missteps and to try and tell us that we should not be regarding her as a hero. But I think that the overwhelming majority of South Africans are saying, we forgave you, so we will choose to forgive her as well for whatever missteps and reconcile her memory and her legacy and say that ultimately it's a positive legacy that I think that we have been dignified by.
The ANC released a statement which said in part, she was an inspiration to millions of downtrodden women across the length and breadth of the country, across the continent and across the world. How important was her role in empowering women?
You see, in a patriarchal ANC that so far has never had a woman leader, a woman president, in a patriarchal ANC that was as much the creation of tribes as it was the creation of a liberation ethic, for a woman to rise up and to find a place of prominence, to find her voice, and to take it upon herself to articulate the pain of South Africans and our aspirations for freedom, that is absolutely significant. And she did that with other women, and therefore she did not go as a lone ranger into the terrain occupied by men, but she also inspired other women of her generation to feel that they too can be able to reach their full potential as women and not be cowed either by the apartheid regime on the one side or by the patriarchal ideology that we were all caught up in on the other hand. And so I really think that that was absolutely crucial, whether in career, the first social worker, black social worker in South Africa, whether in defying the stereotype of the at-home mother versus the one that was out there in the trenches fighting for freedom, whether it was in the choices she had to make about ultimately between the lot of her children who often were malnourished and sick while she was incarcerated versus the sacrifices that she had to make on behalf of children all over the world. Those are pioneering steps. Even in the latter days, as a woman, she was the one that kept the ANC honest, where she kept on speaking about those same downtrodden, those same poverty-stricken masses, the same people in the squatter camps of South Africa. She kept reminding us that this was ultimately what liberation had to be about.
Ambassador, how big a moment is this for South Africa now that both Winnie and Nelson Mandela have died? How does it resonate with those like yourself who lived through the fight against apartheid?
I think that this is a moment of great sadness, and probably we should see it as the passing of the baton from that generation to the next one. I think that in between, South Africans have been found wanting, especially over the last decade, about what, if left to our own devices, what can happen and how we can descend into corruption, into state capture, and all of those kind of things. And so I think that following the 54th National Conference of the African National Congress, where we elected a clean leadership by and large, and where we committed ourselves to a national prosecuting authority without fear and favor, going out and sorting out corruption and dismissing those who are corrupt and jailing some others and so forth, I think we can feel a little bit more comforted that as the one generation represented by Nelson Mandela and Winnie Madikizela-Mandela and others, and Ahmad Kathrada and others, as they pass on, that maybe we can regain our composure, we can regain our orientation to a truly honest and corruption-free South Africa that we should be having. So maybe, I think, that had we not had the 54th National Conference that renewed the leadership of the ANC, we may have more reason to worry if we now witness the passing of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. But I think we do so a little bit more comforted that we can take leave of them, understanding that we may be on the path of regaining our integrity as a nation, as a liberation movement, and as a people again.
Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, thanks for joining us, sir. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Knight in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.